But first, breaking tonight, as the president's attorney general is calling attention to the huge numbers of arrests since the federalization of D.C. police force, today the vice president and the defense secretary took a field trip of sorts to see for themselves what's happening in the nation's capital. This comes as the Justice Department looks into suspicious crime statistics from D.C. Metro Police. Correspondent David Spunt has details tonight. Good evening, David.
Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth making an unannounced trip to thank National Guard troops. Somehow protesters found out, and the rest, well, watch.
The Vice President and Defense Secretary unfazed during their visit to D.C.'s Union Station, both calling out crime not only in the nation's capital but across the country.
I'm highly skeptical that a majority of D.C. residents don't want their city to have better public safety and more reasonable safety standards within Washington, D.C. I don't know what poll you're talking about. Maybe the same polls that said Kamala Harris would win the popular vote by 10 points.
On the streets of D.C., administration officials insist efforts to combat crime are working.
All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all of these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been.
Attorney General Pam Bondi touting more than 550 arrests since the joint operation began almost 2 weeks ago. The U.S. Marshals Service is offering $500 rewards for information leading to an arrest in D.C. during the public safety surge.
When you walk around the streets, you'll notice a difference. And that's what President Trump was talking about when he said we're going to clean up our streets.
It comes as federal officials are taking a new approach to law enforcement in the city, telling local prosecutors not to seek felony charges against people carrying rifles or shotguns. And a youth curfew goes into effect Thursday evening in parts of Washington. Democratic Mayor Muriel Bowser today responding to news the Justice Department opened a formal investigation into the potential tampering of D.C. crime statistics to make the city appear safer.
We'll cooperate with any investigation. We know that crime has gone down in our city.
D.C. statistics, Brett, show violent crime dropped 26% last year, but many at the White House and Justice Department just don't believe it. It's unclear if there will be any federal charges stemming from this probe. Brett.
All right, David, thank you.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for having us here today.
Good to see you.
So you had quite an eventful morning
We did.
over at Union Station, as we saw in that clip. Tell us about how you decided to go over there. You know, a lot of us D.C. residents and former D.C. residents know it well, but it's been the site of a lot of crime in recent years.
Of course.
And you decided to pay a visit. What happened?
Well, so a couple things. So first of all, I had heard from a couple of friends who used to avoid Union Station because there were vagrants and there were crazy people screaming at kids that they avoided Union Station. But over the past 9 days, since the president did this emergency order, it looks a lot better. It feels a lot safer. So I was talking with Stephen Miller and with Pete Hegseth about this in the Oval Office yesterday. And I was like, you know, we should just go over there and say hello to people. And you've got a lot of National Guardsmen over there, some D.C. cops who have been heckled by some of the protesters. So I thought, what a good show of moral support to have the vice president and some of the senior team at the White House show up. We bought him some burgers, hang out with him a little bit. And actually, the most interesting thing, Laura, was after the cameras left, Pete and Steve and I stayed and, you know, had lunch with these troops and just learned a lot about what they're seeing, about how much the city has changed in just the past 9 days. So crazy statistic. You know, violent crime has dropped in D.C. 35% in 9 days. Robberies in D.C. have dropped 55% in 9 days. And it highlights the fact that this living with lawlessness and disorder, that's fundamentally a question of political will. If you've got the political will to enforce the law, you can make even cities like D.C. safe again. And that's what we're demonstrating. And I hope that the American people take an important lesson from this, because obviously D.C. is a federal city, New York, L.A., these places are not. I hope the American people just recognize that you don't have to live with lawlessness. You don't have to live with third world murder rates. If you just take control of these cities, you can make them safe places to live in.
So your pal Gavin Newsome calls this an abuse of power, that this is just a power grab, and this is all stunt for show, and that you all are going to roll through other cities. You've heard things about, oh, martial law is going to be declared.
Yep,
into that, you say?
Well, first of all, how is it a power grab or how is it a stunt when we've already declined murders by 35% in 9 days? How many people are living and breathing today because Donald Trump had the willpower to say, you know what, we're sick of D.C. being a home to lawlessness. We're going to bring some public order back to the nation's capital. So what I would say to Gavin Newsome or to anybody else in some of these big blue states or big blue cities is you can have law and order, you can have common decency, you can have public spaces that young families can go to again. Think of a story, Laura. A couple of years ago, the last time I was in Union Station, I took my little kids there to get lunch, and they were being screamed at by homeless people, not compassionate to the homeless people to let them just fester when they clearly have mental health problems, not compassionate to young families to not be able to go into one of America's great public spaces without being screamed at by a person clearly suffering
Why are
from a
Democrats
mental
doing
illness.
this?
I don't know.
Why is this a
don't
political
know.
strategy for
Laura,
them?
I have thought about this so often and so many times. I don't know why Democrats seem to love public disorder and chaos almost as a political ideology. And I think that part of what's going on is Democrats have gotten so divorced from the communities that they allegedly serve that they don't realize the gross majority of residents in D.C., they want to walk through Union Station and just have a bite to eat or enjoy the space with their families. They don't realize that so many people have been absolutely terrorized by Democrat crime policies. And so maybe they just don't make the connection between what Gavin Newsom says and the fact that places like D.C. or Los Angeles have some of the highest murder rates in the world.
And the D.C. police are being investigated for potentially manipulating their crime data. I've heard this from other police forces across the country. Great cops, beat cops in places like Chicago have said, oh, some of the crimes are reclassified to make a burglary something that's more of a disturbance, and that kind of stuff happens. But is this a federal issue at this point, if this is a manipulation of data and if it's widespread?
Well, it's certainly something that's being investigated, and I hope that we'll uncover what's going on. But even aside from any manipulation of data, when you have 911 wait times that are so long, a lot of crime doesn't even get reported. And we heard this all the time. People would say, well, my home's being robbed. I'm not even going to call the police because it's going to be 45 minutes before they show up. And that's not an indictment of the beat cop, by the way. They're so overwhelmed by how much violent crime there is that they're unable to actually bring public safety to these communities. So what we're doing is just changing the balance a little bit. We're putting more good guys on the streets, and we're taking more bad guys off the streets. And we think that's the sort of thing that's going to bring public safety back to D.C. Again, it's already working in a very big way.
Now, on to Ukraine. Your February meeting with Zelensky and the president, that was quite something to behold.
It was good
how
TV.
how did you all break the ice this time? Take us into the room, because we're all dying to know that.
Well, I think when President Zelensky walked into the Oval Office, I was chatting with him, with the president, with some of the senior Ukrainian delegation. I said, Mr. President, so long as you behave, I won't say anything. And he just chuckled a little bit. And it was a good little icebreaker. I mean, what the president's trying to do, meaning our president is trying to do, is bring a 3.5-year, very brutal conflict to a stop. It's killed way too many Ukrainians, way too many Russians. It's completely transformed the economy of Europe and of big parts of Asia. We just got to get back to peace. And I really do think you heard Vladimir Putin say this, that if Donald Trump had been president in 2022, this war would have never started. And now the president is really spending a lot of time, a lot of effort to stop Joe Biden's war, because I think it is Joe Biden's war. Without him being weak and provocative, I don't think that Russia would have invaded Ukraine. And now we have a situation where the president is trying to be strong and bold and trying to bring this thing to a close.
Now, take us into the room when the president said, I'm going to call Putin now. And you got the Western leaders, they've all come to Washington. Now, what was their facial expression at that point? Did they anticipate that this was going to happen because it was, 8 hours ahead, Moscow time?
Yeah, it was like 1 a.m. Moscow time, and they had no anticipation. So we're actually in the east wing of the White House, and the president says, we've had a pretty good meeting. I'm going to go call Vladimir Putin and see what he says about it. And everybody's like, oh, you're going to call him next week? And he's like, no, what time is it in Moscow? Let's call him right now. And I think one of the things I've realized about President Trump's leadership is he cuts through the BS of some of these diplomatic protocols and just says, I'm going to get things done. If I want to talk to somebody, I'm going to talk to somebody. You had a lot of the Europeans who were saying, no, there needs to be proper, vetting, and the teams have to prepare the phone call and blah, 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 blah. And the president was like, no. I want to talk to the guy. I'm going to talk to the guy. And I think that kind of no holds barred, no BS diplomacy is part of the reason why we've made the progress we have. And we've made a lot of progress, Laura. Look, who knows what's going to happen? The president tells me this all the time. You can never say with certainty what the outcome in this situation is going to be. But we now have the Russians talking to the Ukrainians. They're talking details about what would be necessary on each side to stop the fighting and stop the killing. We've made more progress in 3 months than the country had made in 3 years in stopping this conflict. And I think it's because sometimes you just need a president who will pick up the phone and call somebody.
I'm going to say when Vladimir Putin meets with Volodymyr Zelensky, can we assume that all the big details will have been discussed and generally agreed upon, namely the security agreement and land swap?
It's a good question. I think that if you go through the bureaucratic process, then the answer is yes. But I think the president's preference and my preference would be, let's have them meet regardless. You don't have to figure out every issue. And sometimes leaders sitting down face to face can break the logjam that their teams don't necessarily have the ability to do. There really are two big questions lingering out there. And in some ways it's very simple, but in some ways it's very complicated. Number one is Ukraine wants to know that it's not going to get invaded again by Russia. It wants to know that it's got territorial integrity long into the future. The Russians want certain pieces of territory, most of which they've occupied, but some of which they haven't. So that is really where the meat of the negotiation is. The Ukrainians want security guarantees. The Russians want a certain amount of territory. Again, we finally got the details. We're working on them, but we haven't figured everything out. And I don't think that we should force, we shouldn't say that they can't sit down until you figured out every little detail. Sometimes them sitting down is what facilitates figuring out those details.
You have been so strong on the idea of Europe paying for Europe's defense.
Sure.
And I think a lot of Americans don't understand that the EU GDP last year was about $19.18 trillion, if I'm right, give or take. And the UK's is about $2.9 trillion.
Sure.
Ours is $29.8 trillion, right?
You know the numbers better than I do. You should be Treasury Secretary.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott, I got your job. No, but so this is a lot of money. Europe has the money to defend itself. So the security agreement, my question to you is, why should America carry the lion's share of the burden from now until Lord knows when for Europe when Europe has the money to defend itself?
Well, I don't think we should carry the burden here. I think that we should be helpful if it's necessary to stop the war and to stop the killing. But I think that we should expect, and the president certainly expects, Europe to play the leading role here. And what he said very clearly is, look, the United States is open to having the conversation, but we're not going to make commitments until we figure out what's going to be necessary to stop the war in the first place. And I think that it's, the president is very good. He never takes anything off the table. He never puts anything fully on the table because he doesn't want to give away his leverage. And this is the private conversation that we're all going to have about what's necessary to stop the war. But no matter what happens, no matter what form this takes, the Europeans are going to have to take the lion's share of the burden. It's their continent, it's their security, and the president's been very clear they're going to have to step up here.
What's it like meeting Putin? What was he like, just one-on-one?
So I've actually never met Putin. The president did that meeting. I've talked to him on the phone a number of times. It's interesting. He's more soft-spoken than you would necessarily expect. The American media has a particular image of him. He's soft-spoken in a certain way. He's very deliberate. He's very careful. And I think fundamentally he's a person who looks out for the interests as he sees it of Russia. And I think one of the reasons he respects the President of the United States is because he knows the President looks out for the interests of the American people. And while they often disagree about issues, and obviously the President has been very critical of Vladimir Putin, the President's also willing to work with anybody if he thinks it's going to accomplish an important goal for America. And we all agree an important goal is to stop the killing.
Let's move to the economy, because that is still the #1 issue in the United States for most voters.
Sure.
The Democrats seem to be banking on an economic downturn, just like they seem to be banking on chaos in the streets against the National Guard.
Sure.
How do you see the economy in the next 6 months as we're seeing some continuing uncertainty regarding interest rates and Jerome Powell?
Well, unfortunately, you have the Democrats. I think they really are betting against the United States. We're betting on the United States and the American people. There are a lot of good things happening in the economy. You have a lot of new investment coming in part because the tariffs. People are trying to avoid the tariffs by building in the United States, which is their whole point, Laura, and why the president has been right about this issue from the beginning. You see blue-collar wages rising at their fastest rate in 50, 60 years. You see inflation cooling off, though there's still a lot of work to do there. So I feel very good about where the economy is. You can never predict the future. But I think what people all over the world recognize is that it's a time to build in the United States of America. If you want to build a car, you want to build a car manufacturing facility, if you want to build a next generation technology facility, if you want to build houses, whatever you want to do, we are the place to do business.
How about rare earths and magnets, which is what we're dependent on with China, which gives them an enormous amount of leverage over us.
And that's something the president has really directed the entire team to fix that issue, because whether it's rare earth magnets or pharmaceuticals, he wants the United States to depend on Americans. We should not be in a situation where foreign adversaries or competitors have control over critical parts of our economy. Think about this, Laura. God forbid Americans are in some sort of conflict and we can't get antibiotics because we're in a conflict against a country that makes the antibiotics. You don't have economic freedom and you don't have real prosperity unless you make your own stuff. That's why the President of the United States is making it so much easier to build things and make things in America.
Now, I know you love talking about politics because you're going to say, well, we can't look forward to 2028. I understand that.
I'm sick of politics,
But Democrats are still doing their 2024 autopsy.
Yes.
Okay. And part of their autopsy is that going forward, they need to kind of be more like Trump in tone, tougher, have nicknames. Newsom's given you a nickname, which I don't even understand, called Just Dance Vance. So I guess, what's your favorite dance? What's your favorite dance music? I mean, it's the dumbest nickname. But how lost are the Democrats right now? And you can answer the dance question.
I mean, look, the autopsy for the Democrats, some free political advice from the President of the United States is stop sounding like crazy people. That really is all it is. I mean, this idea that Gavin Newsom is somehow going to mimic Donald Trump's style, I think that ignores the fundamental genius of President Trump's political success, which is that he's authentic. He just is who he is. You've got to be yourself. You've actually got to talk to people honestly about the issues. I don't think it's that complicated. Don't be a crazy person. Be authentic. If the Democrats did that, they'd do a hell of a lot better. But the thing is, the Democrats really can't help themselves. If you look at the transgender issue, they're still talking about letting men play in women's sports. If you look at the crime issue, they're calling Donald Trump a fascist for taking action that in 9 days has dropped armed robberies by 55%. So part of sounding less crazy is being less crazy. And if the Democrats were less crazy, I think we'd all get along a whole lot better.
I'm not trying to pick on California because I am a member of the California bar, so don't get me here. But look, we've had a situation where they're giving commercial driver's licenses to illegal aliens who can't speak English.
Who don't have basic English competency.
And they're killing Americans,
which matters a whole lot because if you're going to read a road sign, Laura, you might as well, or you need to actually read the language the road sign is written in. And of course, this illegal alien in California killed 3 innocent people because he was reckless, he was dangerous, he shouldn't have been in the country. But now we come to find out he can't even read in the language the road signs are written in. So this is, again, it goes to the Democrats' basic problem, which is they're just too crazy. Imagine if you had a Democratic Party that was focused on enhancing the prosperity and the safety of American citizens rather than bringing in millions of low-wage illegal immigrants, giving them the right to vote, and allowing them to effectively make it harder for Americans to live a good life. That's all this is about. They care more about low-wage foreigners than they do about their own people. That is the fundamental craziness at the heart of the Democratic Party. And until they change that, Gavin Newsom can mimic Donald Trump all that he wants to. They're still going to lose unless they get better policies that actually serve the American people.
Given the fact that they're endangering the lives and killing American citizens, as we saw with that horrific crash in Florida.
Literally killing American citizens.
Literally killing Americans. I mean, these are not made-up statistics. These just happen. I mean, federal highway funds, that's leverage that the federal government has over the states that refuse to do the basics.
That's exactly
Would you
right.
consider advising that DOT and the administration pull back on federal highway funds for these states?
So I don't want to get ahead of any administration announcements, but we are looking at a whole host of points of leverage we can exercise over California and other states to make sure they comply with the law. Sanctuary cities are killing people because you allow these violent criminals to set up shop in your cities. Obviously, you saw this case with the person who murdered people on the road, 3 people on the road, because he couldn't even read the road signs. We have a lot of points of leverage here, but fundamentally, I think the American people have to stand with us here. Because when we go and tell the governor of California or the governor of New York that you have to stop putting the interests of illegal aliens over American citizens, we need the American people to stand with us. And I think that they will. I think that they are. But we're definitely not going to let this slide, Laura. You can't do it. You've got to stop putting the interests of foreigners who don't have the right to be here over the interests of American citizens. That is the entire point and purpose of the Democratic Party. If you go back to the election of 2024, what was the big issue? The big issue was illegal immigration. They were actually defending the rights of illegal immigrants to come into our country, to vote in our elections, to collect Social Security and Medicaid that ought by right go to American citizens, to say nothing of housing. This is actually the biggest driver of housing costs in some of these big blue cities, is that they've flooded the zone with illegal immigrants. As we've kicked illegal aliens out of our country, you actually see housing costs start to level off. So fundamentally, the difference between Republicans and Democrats is we care about American citizens. They actually don't like American citizens and want to replace them with low-wage foreigners. It's a very stark difference, and I think the American people are going to continue to reward us because of it.
All right. When Elon Musk departed, he said it was, dramatic departure. And I know you know him well, you're good friends with him, but he said he's going to start a third party, and that sent everyone into the stratosphere. But he's since kind of backed off that. And now, according to the Wall Street Journal, he is considering backing you in 2028. I know you don't want to get ahead of the president. He's only 7 months into this. But would that be something you would welcome, certainly his staying in politics and perhaps supporting you down the road?
Yeah, so I saw the story, and as far as I can tell, the story is completely fake. I've never talked with Elon Musk or, frankly, any other donor about 2028. I do think that it would be a huge mistake for Elon to go forward with a third party. And my argument to him is, whether you like it or not, you are now perceived by the far left as on the side of the American right. You believe in law and order, you believe in closed borders, you believe in economic growth and prosperity, you believe in making things in the United States of America. The idea that Elon is ever going to go back to being sort of in the middle, where Democrats and Republicans both like him, that's just not going to happen. He is perceived as being on the American right. And so if he doesn't like things the Republican Party is doing, my advice to Elon would be try to fix the Republican Party. Try to push it in your own way. Disagree with me all you want, disagree with the President of the United States, but don't pretend that you can make a big difference with a third party. I think Elon would make a much bigger difference if he stayed loyal to President Trump's Republican Party. And if he had disagreements, express those disagreements from the inside as opposed to from the outside.
The New York Times just reported that the Democrats are in a voter registration spiral. 2.1 million Americans ditched the Democrat Party between 2020 and 2024. Meanwhile, the GOP is doing pretty well. They're gaining 2.4 million. So is this a moment where we could see the midterm curse reversed and the Republican Party gain some ground?
I think we have a good chance, but take nothing for granted, Laura. You have the Democrats are still trying to register illegal aliens. They still explicitly say that they want illegal aliens to vote in federal elections. We still have, I think, a lot of headwinds from the media. They never tell the truth about what we're doing, about what the president has accomplished for the American people. So don't rest on our laurels. Keep on achieving victories for the American people and keep on trying to win. That's our path to being able to continue to govern this country. I'm not going to bank anything in 2026. We just have to keep working at it.
Who's your best friend in the cabinet?
We have a lot of good friends, right? I mean, the weird thing is, you say it's one person, then fundamentally that's an insult to other people. I mean, Marco and I are very close. We were close in the Senate. He's been a great friend of mine. I think he's doing a great job. Pete Hegseth, who I went to Union Station, I think is doing a great job as Secretary of Defense. And really, the D.C. swamp tried to destroy Pete Hegseth unlike anybody in the administration. And that really kind of, whenever I see the worst people in the world trying to tear a guy down, that makes me think he's on our side.
Are you doing push-ups and pull-ups with him and Bobby? Are you?
I have not yet done, and I'm sure they can do more push-ups and pull-ups than I have. But I am, it's funny. I do love this presidential focus on fitness. And Bobby and Pete are obviously leading the way, but I'm going to participate as much as I can.
You're going to Georgia, big, beautiful bill. Can we expect any fireworks down there? What can we say?
Well, I guess it depends on who's going to show up to the rally. But yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun, talk about the big successes of the big, beautiful bill, the fact that it lowers taxes for the gross majority of Americans, the fact that we're making it easier to build things in America again. So we're going to have a good time, and we're going to talk about all the things the president's doing just to make people's lives better. That's the whole reason we're doing this. We want Americans to be able to live safe, prosperous lives in their own country. We made a lot of progress in 7 months. We're going to make a lot more.
In the meantime, in Washington, federal sources confirmed to Fox that the Department of Justice is officially launching an investigation into claims that D.C. police manipulated crime data. The chair of the D.C. Police Union now calling out department officials, saying the declining numbers just really don't align with the recent spree of violent crimes.
Inevitably, you'll have a captain or a commander or sometimes a lieutenant show up on the scene and advise them to take a report for a lesser offense. One of the things that we see them do often is sometimes there'll be a shooting or a stabbing, and if the victim is uncooperative with the police, which is not uncommon in some areas of the city, they'll be directed to take an injured person to the hospital report, which is not even a crime at all. It's an incident report. This is something that's been, unfortunately, part and parcel of the police department for some time, and we're very skeptical that these crime stats are accurate.
And our David Spun is joining us live in Washington, D.C. this morning with the latest on this. Hi, David.
Hi, Bill. Federal prosecutors began the probe shortly after taking control over the D.C. Police Department early last week. What is unclear this morning, will it yield any charges? Those two sources briefed on the matter tell Fox D.C. police statistics show violent crime down 26% from last year, but members of the Trump administration, the DOJ, and others dispute those numbers and point to reports of a D.C. police detective who was put on leave earlier this year pending an investigation into potentially fudging some numbers.
We know that D.C. has been an incredibly unsafe place to live for a very long time, and so in some ways, it's not surprising that we hear about reports of this type of conduct that suggests that D.C. is safer than everybody that lives here knows to be true. So we're investigating it, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it at some point soon.
Now, I'm talking about a DOJ investigation, but there are reports the police department is doing its own internal probe. I reached out last week to Metropolitan Police. A spokesperson told me on reports of a detective potentially changing numbers that the MPD cannot comment on active internal investigations and personnel matters. Meanwhile, President Trump posted about the probe on Monday, writing, it was done to, quote, create a false illusion of safety. Those briefed would not comment further, but we're told it's being run out of U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's office. The White House touting new numbers. They claim crime is falling and has been over the past 2 weeks, more than 500 arrests since operations began earlier this month. And I want to show you this graphic of staffing. We showed it yesterday, but it's important. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser said recently that D.C. needs at least another 500 police department officers on the force. They're understaffed. Now, they say that the majority of this is budget related. The D.C. Council has the mayor and the police chief hamstrung. The D.C. operation, as I said, has yielded about 550 arrests. And now the U.S. Marshal's Office, Dana and Bill, announcing this morning they're offering $500 for information leading to each individual arrest during this operation. So we're going to see how that works out.
Yeah, we'll see if people look to cash in on that little payday. David Spun, live in D.C. for us. David, thank you.
Thanks.
And let's bring in Josh Holmes. He is co-host of the Ruthless podcast, friend of the show. Great to have you here. Mayor Bowser is maintaining that this is not necessary. Watch here.
This doesn't make sense. You know it doesn't make sense. The numbers on the ground in the district don't support 1,000 people from other states coming to Washington, D.C. You know that.
What is the feeling there in Washington, as she's got her point of view and I know she's got her constituency, but what do you feel on the ground?
Yeah, good morning, Dana. I think the vast majority of people who live in Washington and work in Washington are grateful for the effort to try to clean up the streets. This wouldn't be a problem if the mayor had done her job in the first place. And I think that the story that you're covering here is critically important. Obviously, a huge component of knowing how to keep a community safe is having good data and understanding what's going on there. You need law enforcement to be prepared accurately to try to tackle a criminal problem within city limits. This seems to be a big problem. I think we're all used to a leftist sort of manipulation of data that compares the current situation to something short of Mad Max-style lawlessness to suggest everything's fine. This seems much more concerning, much more pernicious, and that data could have been manipulated in and of itself, according to the D.C. Union Police Chief.
Josh, apparently one D.C. police commander has already been suspended as a result of this, and Mayor Bowser is essentially saying this is one person, nothing else to see here. Take a listen. Oh, it's a quote. My apologies. She says, quote, the chief of police had concerns about one commander, investigated all 7 districts, and verified that the concern was with one person. So we're completing that investigation, and we don't believe it implicates that many cases. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, look, that's just not what the D.C. Union Police Chief has to say. They say that it's a frequent practice of higher-ups suggesting that people file lesser incident reports for criminal activity when they arrive onto the scene. We're going to find out whether that's true or not. Thank goodness the DOJ has taken the step to try to figure that out, because it's not just about making your city look safer than it is, which we know that's a common practice with this crew. It's about making sure that law enforcement has the tools to tackle the problem in front of them. I mean, we're like a year or two removed from this D.C. City Council suggesting that it's the kind of car you drive that's the fault of the stealing of your car. Or they can give you air chips to try to track your stolen vehicle so you can track it down more quickly. I mean, this is not law enforcement. It hasn't been for a very long time. And so I think most people are grateful this is happening.
One of the problems is youth crime and how the laws have changed in Washington, D.C. And Denise Rucker-Krepp, now she was an Obama appointee. She's a lifelong Democrat. She did an interview yesterday saying the youth crime issue and the age limit is an issue. Watch.
So when I was a kid, a juvenile was somebody under the age of 18. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But according to the DC Council, a juvenile is somebody under the age of 24. So they were saying, hey, you're a juvenile until you're 24. You could have kids, but you yourself are a juvenile. And we're not going to consider, you fully developed, that you will be fully accountable for your crimes. And I remember going to Charles Allen at the time, who's the Ward 6 council member, going, Charles, what are you doing, dude?
And yet, Josh, many Democrats want to lower the voting age to 16.
Yeah. I mean, to have this kind of a crime problem, not just in D.C., but across this country, it has to be a systemic effort by those in charge to try to do things like she's suggesting here. Change age data, change prosecutorial requirements, ensure that you're not actually bringing justice to violent crimes across this city. The D.C. City Council's engaged in this for a long period of time. This is the result of it. Hopefully we can reverse all of that.
All right, Josh Holmes, thanks for joining us this morning, kicking us off on a Wednesday. Thank you.
So let's bring in NYPD Chief of Department, John Schell. Chief Schell, great to have you with us. Great to have you back on the program.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. So let's take a look at the stats in New York City from July 2024 to July of 2025. And we do see very significant declines in murder and rape and robbery and felony assault. So given what we're hearing from D.C., from the one of their chief detectives and a head of the police union, he says that the numbers there are off, that they are cooked to some extent. What about these numbers, Chief?
Well, I can't speak to NPD, but we have a whole quality assurance division that monitors our numbers daily. And they do massive audits every couple of months on all of our complaint reports. They marry up to our 911 calls. So we have a very robust system in the integrity of our numbers. But one thing you don't see on the stats you showed, our enforcement, our police officers, our detectives, our overall apparatus here, we have the most enforcement, beating a 30-year number. So our cops are working extremely hard, understaffed, getting these numbers like you see down like this, not including our shooting violence and murder violence, which is at all-time lows. But cops, like Washington, we were set on a path with all law changes from our state legislature, our city council, our defund the police, our qualified immunity, everything. The whole world changed in 2020, but it didn't take place until 2022 because we were still in COVID. So before we speak about deployment and police officers, how do we get here? We need changes to our laws to get back to where we were. We don't take a victory lap in having the lowest number of shootings and murders. We're happy with the progress, but we fight this daily. And our cops are working very hard to get back to a comfort zone where the numbers are low, but the perception is better. But the question remains, how did we get here? We always have to put that in context. How did we get into this boat in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, and I think it is the most important question. But what we're seeing in this National Guard situation in D.C. is that the federal government is bringing in the National Guard. You do have some anecdotal response from people on the street saying that they feel safer when they see these National Guard members around. Then you hear Mayor Bowser and leadership in Washington saying, we don't need this. Our numbers are so improved. But you've got representatives from the police department saying those aren't actually our numbers. People tell us to knock down the offenses. You heard the detective say that some of the younger officers on the scene are told to change an assault to we took an injured person to the hospital, which is not even, there's no crime involved in that. Does that ring true for you? Does that kind of thing happen in New York City as well?
No, it does not. And if it did, let me be quite clear, there'd be severe consequences. Okay, no one loses their command for being up in crime. They lose their command if they do something like that. So there's severe consequences involved in that. But for NPD, if I heard the union leader right yesterday, they're down about 20% in staffing. They're down 800 cops, and we have a police force of 4,000. That's a major problem. And D.C. is a very small area. New York City is 3 times the size, but 8.5 million people, so it's a different comparison. But what we do here in New York City in terms of our staffing, we mobilize cops every night, over 1,000, sometimes 2,000, to hotspot areas in the city. So we're doing more or less, and we're seeing the results, and we're happy with the progress. But we keep fighting it. Like I said, we're not taking victory laps. We're trying to keep the city safe.
Chief John Schell, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming by today.
Thank you.
Retired NYPD Inspector Paul Morrow, an attorney and a Fox News contributor. Paul, it's great to have you with us today. We all remember this shocking video, this couple out enjoying a Saturday evening out by the river. He is an off-duty agent and gets shot in the course of this. I want to put up the timeline of Miguel Moro Nunez's arrests prior to this, which happened in July, just to give people a sense of how many times this individual was interacting with the law. October of 2023, he's arrested and charged with federal grand larceny, petty larceny, and reckless driving. Then inside 1 year, the NYPD arrests him again. This one is third-degree assault. Then in November, a month later, he's got a final deportation order after he misses an immigration hearing. And then 2 more interactions in November, another one in January. And then in February, he is arrested, issued a warrant for his arrest in Leominster, Massachusetts. He's up in Massachusetts at that point. And this is just armed robbery with a firearm. And then just a few months later, he is on the river here in New York. And it led to what we just saw. This is despicable. I mean, how does this happen, Paul, that all of these interactions and this guy's still running around on his moped trying to murder someone?
So, Martha, I would argue that this firmly puts the lie to the talking point on the left that they are on board with deporting violent illegals and that the Trump administration is overstepping by their current immigration enforcement. Because very clearly here you have a case that's emblematic of the fact that they don't want to deport anybody. And of course, it goes to the fact that they're holding the line wherever they can. Because if mass deportation does continue to go forward, it potentially hurts them in the census and hurts their voting rolls. And this is a perfect example. Let's focus on November 6th crime that you just put up in the graphic. That was a federal crime because he didn't show up for his immigration hearing. November 6th, the day after the election. Well, of course, the Trump administration had not taken office yet. And very clearly, the Biden administration did not want ICE out looking for this guy. Dozens of priors, violent felony priors. And let's recognize that the victims in these cases, if we were able to put them also up in a graphic, would be poor, inordinately women, and likely people of color. When you look at where they strike, the DAs in this city, and there are 5, it's not just Alvin Bragg. In this case, the Bronx DA, Darcel Clark, is heavily implicated. 8 or 9 violent crimes, robberies from the back of scooters, and they're still out. At what point does she lock up anybody? Every cop in this city knows, Bronx, you get a free ride.
Let's put up what happened in Washington, D.C., because these things are related. The Vice President and the Defense Secretary there earlier today. Let's play this.
We set a standard in Washington, D.C. that political willpower can bring some common sense law and order back to these communities, then maybe some other communities and other cities will follow suit. So it's kind of crazy. You hear these guys outside, they appear to hate the idea that Americans can enjoy their communities.
So little tough to hear there, but basically he's saying if we set a standard in Washington, D.C., that political willpower can bring some common sense back to these other communities. And you saw these protesters outside of Union Station today, really loud, very vulgar in a lot of situations. What are they protesting against, Paul, when you look at the numbers of arrests that we've seen in just the past several days in Washington?
Well, you're 100% right that these two incidents are connected, because this is emblematic right now of the schism going on in the Democratic Party, where all of the energy, ambition, small donors are among the progressives. And consequently, that's where the party seems to be going. And yet behind the scenes, relative to the D.C. takeover from the Donald Trump administration, you have media figures on the left and others saying, thank God. And you know why? Because it affects them, because that's the Acela corridor. They're all back and forth on Amtrak. They're going through Union Station. They're harassed. I'm down there fairly regularly. I see it. I'm appalled by the conditions in Union Station. And you have to wonder, again, what it is they expect to accomplish here. The problem for the Trump administration, as the vice president elucidates, is that all they can do is bring a pressure campaign. It's a lot more difficult to export what they've done in D.C. to other cities, because D.C. is already federalized, and there is a codicil and home rule that allows them to take it over for 30 days at a time. You don't have that for St. Louis, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, New York, Boston. All the cities, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. is the outlier. And so consequently, all they can do is a pressure campaign, maybe some funding stuff. But what they're hoping to do is demonstrate, look at this, policing works when it's done right. And recognize that the National Guard is not making arrests. They're out there to use their omnipresence to stop stuff before it happens. And that way, the NYPD, the Metropolitan Police, can go out and do what they need to do, chase the radio, chase the 911 jobs. And that's how you get the burglar coming out the window. That's how you get the robbery suspect running down the block holding the knife, because they can get there faster. Response time matters. And this initiative by the Trump administration is working. If only we could do it elsewhere. But as you and I both know, the big city mayors, the blue city prosecutors are really recalcitrant. They just don't want to let that kind of law enforcement in the door.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that very quickly changes someone's attitude is when they have something happen to them or their family member, like Maureen Dowd did, and wrote a very eloquent piece in the New York Times about what happened to her and her sister. And it's pretty remarkable how quickly that changes a lot of people's attitudes. And they're bringing a safer environment to the city of D.C., and it makes people feel more comfortable going out. I don't care what party you belong to. It seems to be the case, but the protesters not really getting that message today, but they have a right to be out there, and out there they were. Paul, thank you very much. Good to see you today.
You Nazi. Thank you to the National Guards folks, to the cops for actually keeping this place safe.
You hear these guys outside, they appear to hate the idea that Americans can enjoy their communities.
I don't think the National Guard should be used for law enforcement. I don't think you have an armed militia in the nation's capital.
Well, the federalization of the D.C. police coming to a head today with a little field trip from the vice president and the defense secretary. Newsweek writing at J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth heckled loudly at Shake Shack. Vance and Hegseth went to Union Station to visit National Guard troops deployed to the nation's capital by the Trump administration. Vance addressed the protests in comments to reporters, stating, "It's kind of bizarre that we have a bunch of old, primarily white people who are out there protesting the policies that keep people safe when they've never felt danger in their entire lives." The vice president spoke to Laura today and will be on the Ingram angle next hour. Take a listen.
So I thought, what a good show of moral support to have the vice president and some of the senior team at the White House show up. We bought him some burgers, hang out with him a little bit. And actually, the most interesting thing, Laura, was after the cameras left, Pete and Steve and I stayed and, had lunch with these troops and just learned a lot about what they're seeing, about how much the city has changed in just the past 9 days.
Yeah, the Vice President on next hour. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, Katie Pavlich, Fox News contributor, and Josh Kroshauer is a Fox News radio political analyst. Katie, thoughts on this? And obviously it's taking front and center for the administration and touting changes they are in D.C. Crime picture.
Well, there are two big goals here for the Trump administration when it comes to federalizing D.C. or taking back control from a failed local leadership in the nation's capital. There's the national implications, of course, because it's America's capital city. And then they want to restore order to the local communities who have been left behind by the city council and by the mayor's policies and by the police department, quite frankly, who has not been properly prosecuting crime or processing evidence. So when you look at Union Station, it is one of the most beautiful architectural marvels that we have in the United States of America. It's a place where Americans come and go from the nation's capital. Dignitaries, oftentimes when they're in New York City for the UN, for example, come to Union Station to go to the U.S. Capitol, which is just steps from Union Station. It's a place that should be safe for all Americans, a major artery into Washington, D.C. And the fact is that it's become a very, very unsafe place. Just in the last year, there have been a number of stabbings and shootings in broad daylight while people are just trying to get to their metro stop, trying to get to the train. They're restoring order, and they're thanking the National Guardsmen there who are doing exactly that. And for the mayor to say, I don't think they should be there, well, I'd like her to react to crime being down by 46% in some cases and down 83% in terms of carjackings, which is the #1 thing that has been plaguing the city.
Yeah. One, the White House touting gun and drug hauls removing from D.C. streets as the crime blitz nets, they say 550 arrests. Tuesday evening sweeps alone resulted in 91 arrests, including 25 illegal aliens. Here's Mayor Bowser talking about this investigation into manipulating the books on crime in D.C.
We know that crime has gone down in our city, and it has gone down precipitously over the last 2 years because of a lot of hard work, changes to our public safety ecosystem, including changes to the law. And we know that those facts don't comport to what some people are saying, but those are the facts.
Juan, thoughts?
Well, I think, Katie's right. There are places, including Union Station, where there are lots of homeless people, mentally ill people, and, you don't always feel safe. Now, what we saw today with Rubio, Vance, and, Stephen Miller going over to Union Station and, circulating with the troops is really a doubling down by the Trump administration, saying they know that saying Democrats are soft on crime is a winner with the Republican base. I think they feel like, you know what, we're going to stir people up and we're going to come in as the law enforcement administration. Now, that's a separate issue from whether or not it's legit to occupy an American city with National Guard. We saw this in Los Angeles. We know the governor out there protested. Now we're seeing the mayor in D.C. There's already talk about, well, this could extend to other big liberal-run cities, Chicago, New York, that they would go in there and deal with crime. I think that has set off a lot of alarms in Democratic circles. To me, what you have to understand, though, is that the booing that was, dismissed by Vice President Vance is not just booing what he derisively called old hippies, old white hippies is what he said. But today there was a Washington Post poll that showed it's overwhelming. There's the local citizens, the people who live here, including me, feel a sense of, being run over. Yes, Katie's right. The mayor and city council, I think, have not done the best job in handling crime. But local citizens feel they have a right to run their own communities, and they feel they have a right to elect local officials and hold them accountable. And seeing the president stepping in this way, it feels like we're being used, speaking as a resident of the District of Columbia, as a political pawn.
Yeah, I will say, Juan, that I hear from other D.C. residents that they feel that there's a safety element to it that they are welcoming. And now, understanding that the police hadn't done all you know, they touted all of these numbers, and now there's an investigation whether the D.C. police were kind of cooking the books. Josh, thought on this politically and where it stands.
Yeah, look, this was J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller walking into the lion's den in one of the most liberal jurisdictions in the country, setting up a made-for-TV moment, essentially taking on the very liberal-minded residents of D.C., which, you know, Juan is right that there is a deep concern about crime in the nation's capital. But when you look at that poll from the Washington Post, most D.C. residents do want, they think the National Guard presence is a little excessive, but there is a balance to be struck. I also think there's an immigration component to this, and Stephen Miller's presence at Union Station was also very significant. When you look at the data that the White House put out, a significant number of the arrests that have been made have been dealing with illegal immigration, illegal immigrants being arrested in the nation's capital. So I don't think it was a coincidence that Stephen Miller, who has made immigration a central issue in this administration, was standing there right with J.D. Vance, right with Pete Hegseth. And that might be a way. They're not saying this is about, at least explicitly, about taking on illegal immigration, but that certainly has been a subtext to a lot of the arrests and the law enforcement.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.